Alright, today, very briefly, we're going to talk about forms of literary nonfiction. Yay. So let's get started. Alright, first of all, there are going to be 6 forms we're going to be talking about today. They're very simple. First one is a diary. It can also be called a journal. Our second one is memoir. Our third one would be and put this in parentheses because it's not always, an essay, but for the sake of this we're going to do literary essay. We're also going to be looking at speech, of course biography, and good old autobiography. So let's get started with the very first one. First of all, we have the diary or journal. It's very simple. It's just a reflection of events that have happened in your life during your day-to-day life. So reflection of day-to-day life. Now, some examples you'll see will be handwritten. And old diaries, because that's what people used to use, they didn't have computers or blogs or anything like that, would reflect gender or wealth. Sometimes these diaries, especially of famous people, are published in an abbreviated form. But the main thing you need to notice, the main key feature of diaries, is that they are typically classified with time. So they'll mention day of the week, or seasons, or even hours. So let's look at a quick example right here. As you can see on this one, it starts out with, and that completely blocks it, I know, but that's okay. It starts out with a date, September 2nd, 1666, Lord's Day. And it then starts talking about the day-to-day things. Some of our maids sitting up late last night to get things ready against us, and we wake up about 3 in the morning to tell us of a great fire they saw in the city. So I rose and slipped on my nightgown and went to her window and thought it to be the backside of Mark Lane at the farthest. So literally, as you can see, a lot of this is very dry, very blah. It's just day-to-day activities. Sometimes there are reflections, but not often. Alright, moving on. Let's look at a memoir. Think of, and this is one of your vocabulary words from a couple weeks back, memorandum. It's part of this. Typically, a memoir is let's get rid of that real quick. Alright. Typically, they're autobiographical. Dadgum. You would think I'd spell being an English teacher. So they're autobiographical. And so but more important than an autobiography, it focuses on a specific time period in a person's life. So it focuses on a specific time period. Also, it will, let's go ahead and erase this because I've run out of room here and I still want to write. So I hope you wrote that down. If not, just go back. Also, it'll be a narrative structure, so it's story-based. And you'll see some things like the development of plot, especially in longer memoirs. So development of plot, there'll be a specific exposition, rising action, climax, all that good stuff. And typically, it'll also contemplate the meaning of this event. So contemplate the meaning of event. Let's go ahead and just put that there. So that's also a big thing. Alright, so let's look at an example. And this one comes from Mark Twain, Cub Pilot of the Mississippi. I soon discovered 2 things. One was that a vessel would not be likely to sail for the mouth of the Amazon under 10 or 12 years, and the other was that the $9 or $10 still left in my pocket would not suffice for so imposing an exploration as I had planned, even if I could afford to wait for a ship. Therefore it followed that I must contrive a new career. The Paul Jones was now bound for St. Louis. I planned a siege against my pilot, and at the end of 3 hard days he surrendered. He agreed to teach me the Mississippi River from New Orleans to St. Louis for $500, payable out of the first wages I should receive after graduating. I entered upon the small enterprise of learning 12 or 1,300 miles of the great Mississippi River with the easy confidence of my time of life. If I had really known what I was about to require my faculties, I should not have had the courage to begin. I suppose that all a pilot had to do was to keep his boat in the river, and I did not consider that could be much of a trick, since it was so wide. So as you notice, this last 2 sentences there, he is contemplating this event in his life. If he would have known about this, he probably would have done it differently. All right, moving on. We have the good old essay or literary essay. Typically, it is an analysis or interpretation of a single theme. So theme. What is theme? Think of also the idea of thesis. So think of those 2 things right there. Its purpose may be either to persuade or inform, so expository or persuasive. Or they might even just be there to entertain the reader, but typically it'll be either to persuade or inform. They'll use observations, things like that. So here's an example from Why the Leaves Turn Color in Fall by Diane Ackerman. The turning leaf stays partly green at first, then reveals splotches of yellow and red as the chlorophyll gradually breaks down. Dark green seems to stay longest in the veins, outlining and defining them. During the summer, chlorophyll dissolves in the heat and light, but is also being steadily replaced. In the fall, on the other hand, no new pigment is produced, and so we notice the other colors that were always there, right in the leaf, although chlorophyll's shocking green hid from the view. With their camouflage gone, we see these colors for the first time all year, and marvel, but they were always there, hidden like a vivid secret beneath the hot, glowing greens of summer. So as you can see right here, this little essay was an expository essay. It was describing turning of leaves in the fall, and it reveals various things. It explains what happens to those leaves. So very, very simple stuff, right? Alright, now we're moving on to another good oldie. The good old speech is obviously, typically, orally delivered. So the first time that it's released is because somebody's actually, speaking. And it's also just like an essay. It's an analysis or interpretation of a single theme. So it's just like an essay, except you're speaking it. You're talking out loud. So just like an essay, it can also persuade or inform or entertain. Typically, they also use observations as a springboard to explore philosophical or spiritual ideas. So it is almost very similar to an essay. The only key difference is, of course, you're talking instead of writing. One good example of that, and here's an excerpt from the argument of John Quincy Adams from his address to the Supreme Court. In rising to address this court as one of its attorneys and counselors, regularly admitted at a great distance of time, I feel that an apology might well be expected where I shall perhaps be more likely to exhibit at once the infirmities of age and the experience of youth, than to render those services to the individuals whose lives and liberties are at the disposal of this court which I would most earnestly desire to render. But I am unwilling to employ one moment of the time of the court in anything that regards my own personal situation. I shall reserve what few observations I may think necessary to offer as an apology to the close of my argument on the merits of the question. I therefore proceed immediately to say that, in consideration of this case, I derive, in the distress I feel for both myself and my clients, consolation from 2 sources. First, that the rights of my clients to their lives and liberties have already been defended by my learned friend and colleague in so able and complete a manner as leaves me scarcely anything to say, and I feel that such full justice has been done to their interests, that any fault or imperfection of mine will merely be attributed to its true cause. And secondly, I derive consolation from the thought that this court is a court of justice, In saying so very a trivial thing, I should not on any other occasion, perhaps, be warranted in asking the court to consider what justice is. So this part, and it's a lot longer than this was on an armistice, the Armistead trial, was just a good old speech that he was addressing to the court, to everybody in the courtroom about a specific subject. All right, so moving on. This one's easy. It's a biography written to tell the life story of another person. So we all know this. It's very simple. All you're doing is you're focusing on the individual's achievements or difficulties that they had to overcome. Not your own, but the subject that you're writing about. So a good example, and this is the United States versus Susan B. Anthony by Margaret Truman. Susan B. Anthony has never been one of my favorite characters. Stern-eyed and grim-lipped, she seemed utterly devoid of warmth and humor and much too quick to dominate the women she worked with. I always thought her personality could be summed up in one word: battle axe. On top of that drawback, she was a fanatic. She joined the women's suffrage movement in 1852 when she was 32 years old. From then until her death in 1906, she could think of little else. So as you notice, this is explaining the life of who? Susan B. Anthony. But that's not the author. The author is Margaret Truman. So it's just very simple. We all know these aspects here. We've seen these biographies before. We've had to read them before. So it's not easy. It should be easy to understand. Finally, we have the autobiography, and when the writer tells his own story. Now, a memoir is very similar to this. The key difference is an autobiography glosses over the entire life. And usually they reflect on it. They also talk about their achievements or their hardships, either one, or both. But the key difference is between a memoir is a memoir focuses on one specific part of their life, and the autobiography goes through their entire thing. And we have a good example here from Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. The dress I wore was lavender taffeta, and each time I breathed it rustled, and knew that I was sucking in air to breathe out shame. It sounded like crepe paper on the back of hearses. As I'd watched Mama put ruffles on the hem and cute little tucks around the waist, I knew that once I put it on, I'd look like a movie star. So as you notice, you see that I wore, I breathed, I was sucking in air. And so you notice it's all about me. It's written in the first person. So if it's not written per first person, then it is not an autobiography. So keep that in mind. Alright, so in conclusion, we've talked about 6 types of nonfiction. This is not all of them, but these are the main ones we'll be working on. We've looked at some of their aspects. And so you just need to keep this in mind, keep these notes with you for tomorrow, because we'll be using our activity. You'll need these notes in class. Whoops, for activity. Okay, so be prepared.